your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in, Eagles fans, to another edition of your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. It's Locked On Eagles, as always, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We thank you for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. It's episode number 5 this week of 5, downloaded into your phone every single week, 365 days a year, no matter what podcast app you use. We're also available in video form as well on YouTube. Make sure you're subscribing to YouTube because we have some exclusive video content. Now we do mock draft Mondays on Monday, Gino, and the visuals are cool now too because you'll be able to see us kind of go through and look at the rankings, look at our thought process of what we're doing. And we're always available on Twitter as well at Locked On Birds, at GC24_football, and at DiBiase LOE. On this 5th edition of LOE this week, we're going to get into stay or go free agent edition. But Gino, it's going to be in-house free agents for the Eagles. And a lot of these players, just so you know, it's going to be mostly defensive players because, as we've talked about a few times this week, the Eagles have spent most of their long-term contracts, the big spenders, the draft picks, those 4 to 5 year contracts. Most of those are going to the offense. Derek Barnett was the last first-round pick on defense in 2017. So more of the Band-Aid signings, the guys that have been acquired through free agency, are on the defensive side. And a lot of those guys are up for deals this offseason.
They just put out the listing, and I think it was Ruben Frank that did this, of players still on the roster from that Super Bowl team.
Oh, that was sad to read, man. It was
sad. It was very sad.
I can't believe it's already been 4 years, but I'm like, damn, that's not a lot.
It's a shame that the NFL works like that, but I think if you've listened to us over the past couple of years on this show, especially with the wave of how free agent signings have worked, the NFL is a 3-year league. You have your 3-year window, and you could see it from the guys they still have on the roster 4 years later. It's just a handful of guys. They turn over these rosters.
And the theme is two linemen, Gino. I mean, the guys that are staying long-term, most of the time they're going to be linemen and quarterbacks.
Exactly, and skill position players, linebackers, safeties, corners. Unless you're one of the best, the team is constantly moving, and you have to keep your place. Fletcher Cox said it the best in one of the audible clips that Philadelphia Eagles YouTube put out this season. You're just renting a chair. You're one of 53 guys and one of 90 on the 90-man roster that is renting a chair in that NovaCare complex. And it all begins in free agency, Lou. Once you bring a free agent in, it likely means somebody else is on their way out. If you sign a free agent from another team, it likely means that you didn't sign a free agent that was pending on your team. So it's just a constant ebb and flow. And you have to have the guys in the front office and that pro personnel department that are able to constantly evaluate other teams and evaluate street free agents, which if you look at the history of what the Eagles have done, they've had a pretty good success rate of free agents and street signings over the past 5 seasons, Lou. I mean, some of the guys that have come in and played major roles, you look at the Cravon LeBlancs of the world, you look at, even Anthony Harris of this season. You could just go down the list. Even the Band-Aid signings are guys that have come in and made an impact, or the trades that they've made in Jay Ajayi's, or the bigger free agent names in Javon
in 2017, they did nail it out of the park. I will say, though, sometimes on the defensive side of the ball, how he has struggled the last few years, you look at,
rightfully so.
Andrew Sendejo and it's not like big name free agent signings. Like the big names, Javon Hargrave, Darius Slay, nailed those. It's been the moves that at the positions that he hasn't invested real resources in, right? Linebacker and safety, that third safety or, any linebacker. Jatavis Brown retires. What was it? Corey Nelson that also got cut. He was supposed to be, LJ Fort was a great signing, but it was because he played great in Baltimore and they cut him. So yeah, I think on defense is where most of these guys are coming from. And when you look at this free agent class this year, it's kind of the same thing. You mentioned Anthony Harris is a free agent this year. So too is Steven Nelson and Ryan Kerrigan and most of the 1 year, Band-Aid, as you mentioned, signings. So what we're going to get into today is, should they stay or should they go? We're obviously going to preview free agency too outside of the organization. What big name players do they need to bring in? Maybe at wide receiver 2, maybe at safety and edge rusher this year. But we're first going to take care of in-house. And I want to stick with that theme on defense, the Band-Aid signings. Let's start with some of those one-year guys. And I want to start with, I think, the weak link in the secondary, and this was Steven Nelson at corner. I don't think, considering the hole the Eagles looked like they were in at CB2 coming out of the draft, right? It reminded me a lot of running back after 2017, when they missed out on Dalvin Cook, when they missed out on Christian McCaffrey. They couldn't really get a guy. They settled for Donnell Pumphrey in the 4th round. When they realized how bad of a move that was, they brought in LeGarrette Blount in June. They nailed that signing. Steven Nelson was kind of a similar move in the summer. And while he wasn't Bradley Fletcher bad, or he wasn't, Byron Maxwell or Nolan Carroll, Kerry Williams, I think he did okay for the spot they were in. At the same time, when they did ask him to play man coverage, when Darius Slay did not shadow, you could instantly tell he was the spot they needed to upgrade.
And that's the exact quote that you should look at. Is he at a spot that you can look to upgrade? I think how you said that was perfect, because he, like you said, wasn't Bradley Fletcher bad. He wasn't Kerry Williams bad, but he's not up to snuff of what you need to defend Amari Cooper, Cedarian Lamb, Michael Gallup, all of these guys that when you're playing in your own division and they're 3 deep at that playmaker position, if your second guy up isn't as good or nearly anywhere as good as your other 2 guys, it's going to be clear.
And your other guys in the slot, Gino. So your second best guy is not going to be able to cover those players because he's inside. And I do wonder how much of him holding his own this year was more on the scheme, because they really were trying to put these corners in spots where they didn't get killed. That was really the theme of Gannon's defense. So how much of it, even really that positive view, how much of it was really even on Nelson's performance?
Yeah, he did have the big play against Carolina that he ended the game. But outside of that, you see a lot of the big chunk yardage plays. It wasn't just in man coverage, even in zone. There's times that he's just covering grass. And when he comes down to tackle, he just didn't really seem like he wanted to invite contact. A lot of the things that I yelled at Eric Wilson about earlier in the year when he was released.
Thank God we don't have to talk about him. Oh, my gosh.
Thank goodness, right? But in the second level of what Jonathan Gannon likes to do, Lou, with these guys getting upfield, only playing really a gap and a half on the defensive line, on the back end, you got to be able to tackle one-on-one. It doesn't matter what position you are in the defensive secondary, linebacker, safety, corner. Darius Slay can tackle. Avonte Maddox can tackle. You know who couldn't tackle? Steven Nelson. So he was a liability, not just in coverage, but also once things got into the open field as well. So you have to have guys that if they are met in space by a big-bodied wide receiver, that number 2 position, those guys are pretty big. I mean, look at what you would have had to face in Tampa Bay if Chris Godwin was healthy. You're facing 2 guys that are 6'3" and 6'5". You got to have somebody on that island that's at least 6 foot, has the length, and can tackle, because right now, that's what Gannon wants to do. And as long as he's here, and as long as Avonte and Darius Slay can play as well as they are in man coverage, they're not going to let them sit back in zone and be beaten like they were earlier in the year. They need somebody that can complement them opposite Darius Slay and Avonte Maddox.
I definitely agree. And, this is the NFL now in 2022 where teams have, as you mentioned, they're 3 deep at times. I mean, you look at some of the teams in the Final Four right now. I know. Yeah, so you can't just have one good guy. And even Avonte Maddox is great that you have 2 really good corners right now. But and a lot of star receivers do play inside. But, when a guy is really cemented as a slot corner and doesn't really change inside and out, you do need that solid outside CB2. And I think the verdict for both of us would be to move on and get younger at that spot and get more talented opposite Darius Slay. I really think of those 4 picks they have in the first 2 rounds, they do need to invest one of those picks in a corner, because although Slay is under contract for a while, coming off the best year maybe he's had in his career, Avonte Maddox has a contract extension. Gino, you do need to add another, significant young resource at this spot.
You did draft Zach McPherson last year. You've traded for the likes of Tay Gowan. You've added bodies, right? But now you have a chance to invest a premier pick into a premier position.
And you couldn't do it last year because you missed out on Surtain and Horn, and so you took the receiver. Hopefully this year you get like a Sauce Gardner that can fall to you.
Daniel Jeremiah had him in the top 6 of his last draft. So I'm not too sure how.
But we took the McCreary, the Auburn kid. I mean, there's
that's what I'm saying.
There's some players.
It's a premier position in this class. And you talk about the big classes that we've looked back in the last couple of years. I mean, you look at that running back class of 2017, you look at the 2018 wide receiver class, these big time groups, you have to walk away from getting a big time guy out of that group. And I think that's exactly what they're going to try to look at in terms of cornerback. If they could look on terms of the defensive line at the edge position, you could probably bet your bottom dollar on that as well. And same thing with linebacker. If they could get one of those top 3 guys, I think they would make that type of pick. So yeah, like you said, if Sauce Gardner does fall, or Andrew Booth or Kyer Elam or any of these big name cornerbacks are there, that's an instant upgrade over a Steven Nelson. And yeah, he might get banged and bruised a couple times in the season, get beat on a double move here or there, but you're also upgrading your talent for 1 to 2 years down the road when maybe Darius Slay isn't even an option for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. And, you know, even though it's a CB2 and to be your 3rd best corner, it is more valuable of a spot than, you know, Howie Roseman doesn't really value investing a lot of resources at safety and linebacker. And I have to put my money, although we want him to take a safety or linebacker early this year, if I had to put my money on one of those 3 spots he takes with one of those 4 picks, I would say it's probably corner over safety and linebacker. Gino, one more before we take a break. Defensive end Ryan Kerrigan. I think it's pretty safe to say move on from Kerrigan. Me and you really liked the signing in the offseason. Kerrigan was an Eagle killer. He gave Lane Johnson more fits than most back when he was with Washington. But outside of randomly having a great playoff game against Tampa Bay, he was, I mean, it was awful. And this is the first time that they've kind of missed on a veteran defensive end signing in a while. I mean, they killed it with Chris Long and Michael Bennett, and bringing Vinny Curry back, I thought he was serviceable. Kerrigan was the first player that just, I mean, couldn't do anything when he was out there. And he had a good amount of snaps, and it was brutal. I think he had like the worst numbers when it comes to a defensive end with a certain amount of stats. I can't remember the specific statistic, but it was pretty bad. So I think the verdict would be to move on.
I mean, he didn't have a tackle until almost week
16. Yeah, I mean, that's bad.
If you're a speed rusher and a guy who needs to be able to like get off the line and you can't do that and you can't win on the edge, I mean, the numbers speak for themselves.
He did not age well.
Be back. No, and in this class, Lou, you're better off just grabbing a guy in the 2nd or 3rd round or even the 4th and letting him get snaps and take away what you would put into Ryan Kerrigan. Same with Teron Jackson this year as well. Like, give snaps to those young guys who have athleticism, have speed, have a dynamic ability off the line, which Ryan Kerrigan really never presented for this team.
We'll talk about edge rusher again coming up next. Derek Barnett is up for free agency, so we'll get into his fate next right here on Locked On Eagles. And guys, today's show is sponsored by Get Upside. It's an incredible app that everybody who buys gas needs to know about. Our listeners are earning cash back for every gallon of gas every time they fill up. Just download the free Get Upside app in the App Store or Google Play right now and use the promo code TOUCHDOWN for 25 cents per gallon or more on your first fill up. Cash back. Don't pay full price at the pump anymore. Gas prices right now are brutal. Get cash back using Get Upside. Just download the app for free and use the promo code TOUCHDOWN for 25 cents per gallon or more on your first tank. Some people who drive a lot are making as much as $200 to $300 a year in cash back, and there's no catch. The cash back gets added right to your account. You can cash out anytime to your bank account, PayPal, or any gift card for Amazon and other brands. Once again, download the free Get Upside app and use the promo code TOUCHDOWN to get 25 cents per gallon or more cash back on your first tank.
And you know what you could do with that money that you get from Get Upside?
That's right.
You could put it right into your e-wallet, put it right into your betonline.ag account. And there might be less football. It's only 3 games remaining in this season, which is crazy to say out loud. But you can always bet on props when it comes to coaches getting fired, when it comes to a coach getting a new location, who can be the number 1 draft pick, as we're talking about that right now, who will be the next team for some of the big free agents. You could do all of that and more and start betting on the 2022 NFL season at betonline.ag. Using that promo code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON, you will get 50% towards your initial deposit. It will be a 50% welcome bonus that will be added directly to your account, where you can bet on basketball, hockey, UFC, literally any sport that you want. I say it all the time, but Every single sport is on there. You could go down the list, click sports, and see cricket across the pond that you didn't even know you could bet on, or women's tennis, or men's tennis, or whatever sport you want to bet on. It is there. Make sure you go to Bet Online, where the game begins.
All right, Eagles fans, we're back on this Saturday edition of Locked On Eagles, your 5th episode of the week. Make sure you download and subscribe to our YouTube channel and our podcast platforms for 5 shows a week. We are your only daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, and we thank you for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Me and Gino are getting into Stay or Go free agent edition, and it's the in-house free agents for the Birds. So we said go for Steven Nelson, the cornerback that they signed last summer, and Ryan Kerrigan, who used to be an Eagle killer, but this year, kind of still was an Eagle killer based on just not being able to do anything for the Birds as a rotational edge rusher. And Gino, sticking on edge rushers, the biggest name is the player that they last invested a real draft pick on defense in. It's Derek Barnett, the first-round pick in 2017. And when it comes to Stay or Go, I wish it was a tougher call, but I don't really think it is. Barnett in 5 years, looking back, he was okay. He was good at times, but he was never great. He'd get you 5 sacks a year pretty much, but don't ask him for much more. And the issue was, though, that's not really worth, 4 to 6 sacks a year for the liability he was when it comes to penalties. You saw Nick Sirianni early in the year say it's always him. And a theme of Eagles Twitter this year, every time you saw a flag and you knew it was in the backfield, you saw the ref behind the quarterback throw it, you're like, it's Derek Barnett. And it normally was. You were pretty much right all the time. In this year, the penalties were consistent, but he didn't even get to that 5-sack floor you're normally used to. So I feel like it's pretty obvious with, as you said, a deep draft class this year. When you got Josh Sweat coming off a 7.5-sack season, you got Brandon Graham coming back, you got Teron Jackson in year 2. I think it's pretty obvious that you let Barnett walk and you move on here.
Another one of those almost Nelson Aguilar type of deals where it's why did you ever pick up the 5th-year option?
But at least Nelly gave you one great year. Barnett didn't really even give you that, which is disappointing.
Yeah, you look back to his rookie season, the big plays he made, a lot of them came off of
even the
one-on-one with a tight end
twos. Yeah, I agree.
And he's a player that if you want, and for those on YouTube, I'm holding my hand flat. For our listeners, I'm holding it perfectly horizontal. If you wanted somebody that progressed horizontally, you don't take that at the edge position. You take that at interior offensive line where you can have a consistent player. If you're going to take a top 15 guy on a consistent player that is just going to have his floor be the same, and his floor kind of dropped out a little bit this year. At least with Brandon Graham, it was he was, I would say, a victim of circumstance, being in an offense or a defense that didn't really suit him at first. Then they go to a 3-4, and then he kind of explodes. Derek Barnett has always been in that role that suited him best. And his best asset is playing the run, which for their defensive ends, you kind of have to do a little bit, but they want you to be able to do what Josh Sweat is doing.
If he's a 4th-round pick, if you switch where him and Sweat got drafted, I would say that's a fine pick, and you got 4 or 5 really good years out of that player. But as you mentioned, if you're a top 15 pick on the edge, you got to be an impact player. And I think they were kind of, Barnett even coming in, we all knew he didn't have the length and the speed off the edge. Mm-hmm. He didn't have the upside physically of a Josh Sweat. But I think the Brandon Graham move and how much that paid off made the Eagles think, we'll bank on that production again. We'll bank on the intangibles, if you will. And it got you to a certain floor, like you said, but he did not meet the value of that draft pick.
You're right with saying that if they flipped, Josh Sweat is exactly what you would want with a guy who you invest a top 15 pick in. Somebody that starts low and just continues to rise up. And Derek Barnett's what you would want out of a 4th-round pick. Somebody that's
which is why it's disappointing.
It is disappointing. He'll give you consistent play. Looking back on that edge class, absolutely dreadful. After that, it was Tack McKinley. And
got
just
bad. So I guess they did okay if they were going to take an edge,
Won him a Super Bowl in the end.
They could have. That's the thing. It wasn't a horrible. It's like the Nelson Aguilar pick too. Was it a bust considering the value they placed on the pick and what he was supposed to be? Yes. Was it Danny Watkins or Marcus Smith bad? No. He was your DE 2 or 3 for 5 years, and that's again not what you want out of that pick. and that's what we're talking about here is like the value placed on it. When like that's why the discussion of if a player is a bust is there's a lot of context you got to add to it. But I think Gino, he didn't take the step up they wanted him to, and he's not worth another contract.
I think when you look at those top 15 picks, right, and especially at that position, you want to say, did he meet what we expected?
Right.
And did he surpass that?
Yes.
Because I think if you even have to question if he surpassed it, like know that he surpassed it, you're going to give him a contract extension, right? Yeah. But then you're in the situation where did he underperform? Yeah. Did he even meet the par of what we thought? And that's where you're sitting now. And if you have to question that's your decision.
If you can replace his production pretty easily, he's not worth that next contract. And exactly. I feel like his production you can replace pretty easy, Gino.
Yeah, and do it in a multitude of different ways. Like throw Milton Williams on the inside. He'll get you 2.5 to 3 sacks. And then throw somebody else on the edge that could get you 2.5 to 3. Yeah. Oh, you already met Derek Barnett's production.
Yeah, you already matched it. And you're not going to get the
quarter of the cost.
And you're not going to get him taking a cheap shot at the quarterback every other play. I mean, that's just the thing. He wasn't worth it. And so I think we both agree, move on from Derek Barnett.
And this draft class, Lou, sorry to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
This draft class,
you're
going to get a guy in the third day.
And they're going to take – oh, yeah, I agree. And
you know they're probably make an impact as much as Derek did last
It's a good
year.
class. Here's an interesting one. Anthony Harris at safety. So safety is interesting this year. I think they're, assuming they invest like one significant resource at that position. I don't know if it's going to be a high pick with one of those four selections, or if it's, there's some good free agents. I would love Marcus Williams, the New Orleans Saints safety. That's a free agent. There's some good players on the open market as well. Assuming that they invest just like one premier asset in that spot, they're going to have an interesting call with who they want that second primary player to be at safety, because Anthony Harris is up for a new contract, as is Rodney McLeod. So we're going to talk about McLeod and Harris here. You have Marcus Epps, who is probably the most efficient player of the three. Gino, when it comes to those three, like if you had to choose one, you want to be that primary guy next to that other new player you bring in, who would you be leaning towards?
I mean, are we having the same conversation we had 2 years ago when we were deciding between Malcolm Jenkins and Rodney McLeod?
At a much lower level.
A much lower scale. But realistically, we were saying, okay, who's going to go out? Who's going to be the young safety that they're going to bring in next to them? And here we are.
Unfortunately, that year they didn't do any of that. They just kept, bringing in the status quo.
That year, or the year after that, or the year after that. And here we are now in 2021 answering the same question. I would like to know, as well as everybody else, Lou, what are they going to do? I personally am taking that money that you could pay Rodney, that you could play Anthony Harris, and I'm paying Marcus Williams. I'm paying one of those premier type of safeties that fit what they want to do. They're going to open things up on the back end for them. They're not going to be these true box style guys. If you can get a guy like that plays a true free safety role for this team, which I really think they want, especially with their ability to play man. And then you open up for this strong safety to play a robber type of role where he's sitting in those intermediate areas and taking away those looks from top tight ends and top second and slot wide receivers. I would love that. But where's it going to come from? Right now, I have no idea. And realistically, do you keep an aging Rodney McLeod? I don't know. I'd probably pay Anthony Harris. Not pay him much, but I mean, if you're going to look at what Rodney McLeod is now coming off of, he did have a good season coming back off of that injury, but he did just tear his ACL last year. He came back this year, played okay. You could see that he still wasn't 100% when it came to his speed, because he used to be able to fly all over. I still remember before the Eagles signed him, that one clip that he had where he comes from the middle of the field across to the sideline. He just absolutely buries the wide receiver, and it was viral for years. And that's what they need again, because they can't fit those back third areas to the sideline from the middle of the field. They don't have a guy that can.
They need an impact player at both spots. You're talking about that strong safety that plays in the box and plays that Swiss Army knife role, and the roamer in the backfield that can cover sideline to sideline. They need both. And again, I don't know if they're going to invest 2 resources in those spots this offseason. Maybe they want to do that, instead of investing a real pick in a strong safety, they go for a Devin Lloyd or more of the linebacker role, where that's where they find that, versatile player. And as you're saying, they bring in more of that, safety that plays deep through free agency or a high draft pick. When it comes to these like 3 guys, I feel like, and I put this up to a poll, like if you had to choose one of the 2021 safeties to be that second guy, who do you go with? McLeod won the vote at 47%, Marcus Epps at 42%, Anthony Harris only at 11%.
Wow.
And you're right. I mean,
is
I feel
Epps
like
a free agent?
It's a good question. They
think
got
he
him in
would be like
2019.
He might be a restricted free agent because of the whole waiver.
So he had the
option, if I'm not
4-year
mistaken.
rookie deal with Minnesota, and that was in. He's a free agent next year. So
Okay,
Marcus
so
Epps
they
is
still
under
have him for a
contract.
year.
So maybe they let both McLeod and Harris walk. Harris, look, he wasn't close to the 2019 version that was PFF's highest graded safety, but I mean, he did make some nice tackles. Again, Gino, it's hard to evaluate because they didn't, I mean, safety in this defense, it's like you cover one half of the field, the other guy covers the other, and there wasn't as much to do like there was with Jim Schwartz's defense. I would maybe lean on McLeod just based on you'd probably get him for dirt cheap. And he did have a really hot end of the year, just based on that. But they got to, no matter what, bring in another player. I mean, the focus should not be on any of these guys. They have to do something. They can't just do the status quo Band-Aid signing again. They got to invest something real here.
Like, do you put a period or a question mark at the end of a sentence when you're done with it, when you know that you have your guy? And again, you don't put a question mark there at the end, which they have three of them.
You can't fix everything in one off season, but safety for a long time now. I mean, Jenkins and McLeod were the guys, but Jenkins is gone, and McLeod, even if you bring him back, as you mentioned, is not what he once was. So you got to bring in at least one player here. So it'll be interesting to see what they do at safety for sure. It'll be a fascinating watch. When it comes to the second and third level still of the defense, Gennard Avery is a free agent as well. I thought for the first time this year, he finally fit in on what the Eagles were trying to do on defense. The only thing is with Avery and the role he played, like I thought, blitzing, he looked really explosive, running through that A and B gap. Even on the edge, I thought he looked good at times. I thought he moved well in space, but again, it's like when it comes to that role on defense of who I want to have, I would just much rather have a do-it-all player that can just thrive more in coverage. And Avery, they didn't really ask him to do that a lot, but that role, I just rather have a more versatile player.
When you look at that Sam/Jack style linebacker role, that is almost an edge rusher. You look at the top of the top, which is TJ Watt. The guy can do everything. He can cover. He can get to the passer. He can come inside if you need him to at times. Gennard Avery is okay at all of those things. He's not going to blow the doors off. He's a serviceable player, and he's another guy we talk about, a victim of circumstance with the scheme. He's now going into a third year. Maybe he gets another defensive coordinator that isn't Jonathan Gannon either, but you just need a better athlete there. You need somebody that can run better, somebody that can drop into coverage against running backs, because when you saw him out in the flat, you knew he was getting beat one-on-one. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You cannot have the liability at that position like you had in Gennard Avery. Would it be nice to get him for cheap if you could bring him back as like a rotational type rusher? For sure. But they need a top athlete to play that role that they want to. Somebody that's going to drop, somebody that's going to come to the quarterback, somebody that's going to really rove off of that edge position. Gennard Avery has shorter arms. He's got a shorter build. He really can't drop into coverage. He's a little bit stiff. But he does have explosion when getting to the quarterback, which is an asset in this league.
Yeah, I agree. It's I think the consistent theme we're talking about here is just like they could do better at every spot. It's like you just keep telling they were filling holes in with Scotch tape, and it was holding for a bit, but you just every single time you're like, I could do better than this. And again, you're not going to fill every single one of these roles with a star player. You're going to have some role players that you're not investing significant assets in, but for a long time, these are the same positions they've been trying to get by with these kind of players. And they need to do something about it this year when they have flexibility in the draft and in free agency with, cap space and draft picks. We'll continue to move forward here, Gino, and take a focus on the offensive free agents. There aren't as many, but there are a few key players we'll keep an eye on. That's coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles. And guys, today's show is sponsored by Built Bar. It's the new year, so that means New Year's resolutions. If yours is about getting fit or eating healthier, make sure you include a Built Bar in your plan. It's a protein bar that tastes just like a candy bar, if not better. It makes it easier to stick to your resolution because it tastes so good. You'll want to eat it all the time. It has all of the healthy flavors. I should say the healthy nutrients, and at the same time, amazing flavors, all of the flavor, none of the guilt. 130 calories in every bar, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. And there's a flavor for every taste bud: coconut almond, peanut butter brownie, raspberry, cookies and cream, salted caramel, mint brownie, many more. Built Bar is always coming out too with monthly flavors. So make sure you're checking back in on the website. It's built.com. And make sure you use the promo code LOCKED15. That's LOCKED15, and you're going to get 15% off your order. Again, use the promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. All right, Eagles fans, we're wrapping up this final edition of Locked On Eagles this week, episode 5 of 5. Download it into your phone wherever you get the show and on YouTube as well. We got Senior Bowl week coming up. Cannot wait to start previewing some positions for the NFL draft. We start our draft coverage this week, and we kind of started it last week with Mock Draft Monday, so make sure you check out that show and all other 5 shows on our podcast platforms. Today, Gino and I are getting into free agents that the Eagles have in-house and deciding if they should re-sign any of them. Gino, so far, I mean, again, they've all been on defense, and we're not really thrilled with the defensive personnel outside of a few spots, right? Josh Sweat, the defensive tackles were good: Cox, Hargrave, and Williams, Avonte Maddox. But when it comes to, the other edge rushers, the linebackers, the safeties, we're looking for upgrades. So I feel like we both are looking for upgrades in Steven Nelson and definitely in Ryan Kerrigan, Gennard Avery, Anthony Harris. Maybe you bring him back as that second safety again on a cheap deal, but maybe you go cheaper with Rodney McLeod. Who knows what you do there? McLeod also a free agent. It'll be interesting to see what they do, but they definitely need to upgrade the personnel on defense and finally invest on that spot this year. And I think they will. Offense is where most of the foundation pieces are in place, right? With a lot of the young, long-term contracts. But at the same time, there are some free agents, and 2 of them play a spot that the Eagles needed badly this year, and it was at running back, the number 1 rushing attack in the league. And a lot of that started with these 2 players. It's Jordan Howard and it's Boston Scott when they changed the philosophy halfway through the year. And it all started with that Detroit Lions game. Jordan Howard, people forget this running game took off when Miles Sanders was hurt. I mean, they were starting the foundation against Vegas, but Sanders got hurt in that first half, and Howard and Scott really took off. Gino, of those 2 free agents, Sanders and Gainwell are going to be here. Which of those 2 would you rather bring back?
I would go with Boston Scott.
I
think his ability as a pass catcher too. I mean, you could split him out wide if you need to. Jordan Howard, he serves a role. I think you could get younger in that role as well. I think in this running back class, there are a lot of those guys that have that bigger body that you could probably get in day 3. If you wanted to wait till the UDFA period, they've had good success with that as well. But right now, it's going to be the Miles Sanders, Kenny Gainwell, and I say Boston Scott show. Put the athleticism back there. Put the versatility back there. That's the only thing with Jordan Howard. Yeah, he's kind of a cult hero at this point in Philadelphia, but he only does one thing. He runs between the tackles really well, which is a good trait. But I just don't see this team with what they want to do fielding for running backs. They never really did it down the stretch. I mean, Kenny Gainwell had a game where he was a healthy scratch.
Yeah, that's the thing. We need Gainwell to be a bigger part of his offense because he always produced when he was on the field. And if you bring back both guys, I just don't, every time those 2 were featured, Gainwell, like you said, was on the bench. So you got to bring back one. And although Howard has the niche role of that big, powerful running back that those other guys are not, at the same time, that's not worth to me keeping him over Scott. I mean, Scott is more reliable health-wise, and he was just, Boston Scott's always productive when he's out there. He's clutch in big moments, and that's a really reliable and valuable asset to have as your third running back. And I don't want to lose that for Jordan Howard, as you said, just because, he has this certain, I don't know. Yeah, that cult following is a good way to put it, and he is powerful, but in the NFL modern day, I mean, Miles Sanders really got way more physical this year, and Kenny Gainwell in between the tackles ran really hard. And Boston Scott too. I mean, he's small, but they don't shy away from physicality. And so I don't think it's worth that. And with all the injuries Howard is suffering and the stingers that repeatedly happen, I think it's way more, reliable and safe to bring back Scott.
I do too. I'm not saying that they are going to, but I think it would be very indicative.
They might bring back neither. Who knows?
That's what I was just about to say. It might be very indicative if they do draft one, let's say like in round 4 again, right? Where they got Kenny last year, a round 4 running back should get a little bit of uptick in production here.
Wildly enough, round 5, actually, Gino.
Oh, round 5. Yeah, I know.
Which is
with
insane.
The comp picks, it's so close in that territory because they add the comp picks to end of round 4. It's close to round 5, of course. But I'm rambling on here. But I look at it, and if you draft a guy in that role, right? Or let's say even maybe they surprise us and take one in like day 2, that if one falls or something, right? Maybe Miles Sanders isn't in those plans for long. Maybe they're willing to go with these 3 guys and then let Miles go next year and then do the whole process over again. It's going to be one of the most interesting groups in this team to keep an eye on over the next year and a half.
Yeah, the Miles Sanders conundrum is really fascinating just based on he's always productive when he's on the field, but he gets hurt a lot. Maybe they try to, get a team-friendly deal done now. If he wants to wait, though, maybe, they do think we don't want to overpay him next year if he has a great year. Running back is interesting to definitely keep an eye on. Gino, one final spot here before we wrap up the show. It's a restricted free agent, but I do want to talk about Nate Herbeg at right guard because, with Brandon Brooks retiring this week, you do have Isaac Seumalo coming back. Landon Dickerson asserted himself as the guy at left guard, and he's not going to move out that spot next to Jordan Mailata. You've got the future of Jason Kelce up in the air. Herbig has played both center and the guard spots. I thought the last 2 years has really played well when he's out there. And, you have Jack Driscoll too, and you have depth, but I think you want to keep that depth and bring Herbig back. He's not going to cost you much, and he's been very reliable the last 2 years, and you've needed him. So I would love to know I have him and Driscoll back there as role players.
I would look at him and he's a 5th or 6th round tender type of guy where you're going to pay minimal to keep him. But if somebody does want to grab him, you get a 5th or 6th round pick. And he obviously is a player that played an important role for them. Looking at the offensive line, though, you see Brian Baldinger calling Landon Dickerson a baby bulldozer today. He's not going off a left guard, like you said. Right guard, maybe Isaac Seumalo moves there. That could be something that...
and who knows, if Jason Kelce retires, you might move Seumalo to center, and then you might need Herbig or Driscoll to start at right guard. Who knows?
A lot of moving pieces, and that's what's going to be interesting. I don't think Kelce moves this year. I think he still maybe has one more year with the talk of how the team is sounding about him, with how he sounded towards the end of the year. He never really brought up retirement like he did the last couple of years. He kind of did that on his own, if you look back on it. And I think with the foundation of that left side, you do everything in your power to bring him back and then just stabilize that right guard position. When you're talking about Nate Herbig being a guy to bring back is like your 10th offensive lineman, you're in a good state with your offensive line. I want to continue that.
I would like to continue that luxury. Yeah. So I would love to have Herbie back. Him and Driscoll be, those 2 guys, with injuries you can rely on because you have been able to, and that's a great luxury that a lot of teams do not have. So I would definitely bring back Herbig, as would Gino. That'll do it for today's edition of Locked on Eagles. We'll continue to get into free agency in the next few weeks and start to take a look around the league and what players the Eagles can bring in-house, especially on that defensive side of the football. Make sure you subscribe to Locked on Eagles wherever you get your show, 5 days a week on all podcast platforms, on YouTube as well, and on Twitter at Locked on Birds, at DiBiase LOE, and at GC24_football. We'll see you on Monday for Mock Draft Monday. Until then, thank you so much for making Locked on Eagles your first listen each and every day. Gino Camilleri, Louis DiBiase signing off. As always, thank you for downloading, thank you for listening, and let's go Birds.
Fly, Eagles, fly.